There is a silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from absence. And for many parents over 50, that silence lives in the corners of the house they once filled with noise, laughter, messes, and moments. Now those same walls echo with something else, the ache of being forgotten. You gave everything. Years of your life. Sleepless nights. Countless sacrifices. You weren't perfect, but you were present. And yet now, something doesn't feel right. It's not just the physical distance of grown children or the empty nest. It's a deeper kind of loneliness. One that makes you wonder, did they forget who I am? Or did I disappear while becoming everything they needed? Carl Jung once wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." And perhaps now that unlived life, the part you set aside to raise others, is knocking, quietly but insistently, asking to be remembered. This chapter is about that silence, the one that grows louder with every birthday, every unanswered message, every dinner eaten alone. We start here, not with blame, but with truth. Because there's a hidden grief many parents carry, a grief born not from failure, but from devotion. You didn't expect applause, but you didn't expect to be erased, either. It began slowly. A few missed calls, less curiosity about your day, fewer hugs, quieter holidays. They were busy. You understood. But inside, something shifted. You began to feel like a ghost in your own role. A relic. Not out of bitterness, but bewilderment. And still you smiled. You said, "It's okay, they're building their lives." You told your friends you were proud. But in the quiet, you wondered if what you gave had quietly erased you. When children are small, they orbit around you. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, you are the center. And then they leave. As they should. Jung called this individuation, the path of becoming oneself. But what no one prepared you for was your role in that story. To help them become, you had to step back. And stepping back felt like disappearing. You became the background, the emergency contact, the photo in a frame. But individuation, Jung reminds us, is not just for the young. It is the second half of life that asks you to meet yourself again. And perhaps now is your time to begin that journey. You sacrificed, not out of obligation, but out of love. And now, in your quiet home, a question emerges. If I was everything for them, who am I now that they no longer need me? This is not a selfish question. It is a sacred one. Jung believed the unlived parts of our soul never die. They wait. And if you feel forgotten, maybe it's not only by them. Maybe it's by a part of you that you forgot first. This isn't resentment. This is grief. The grief of someone who loved without pause, who gave without keeping score, and now simply wants to be seen, not as useful, but as whole. You are not mourning your children. You are mourning the part of you that vanished in their growing. And now it is returning. You check your phone more often now, not because you are desperate, but because you still hope. Hope to be remembered. Jung reminds us that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. You want to share again. To feel needed, not for tasks, but for presence. This longing is not weakness. It is a soul asking to reconnect. They don't mean to forget. But life is loud. And you, who once stood at the center, now wait in the wings. But there is strength in stillness. There is wisdom in watching. Jung said that in the second half of life, the ego must serve the self, the deeper, wiser part of us. And this chapter of your life, this quiet space, it may be the place where your self begins to speak again. In this silence there is a mirror. And in that mirror, you may finally see the one person who has been waiting to be acknowledged, you. Not the parent, the person, the one with dreams, desires, depth, the one who hasn't vanished, only paused. Jung wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning." You are no longer in the morning, and that is not a tragedy. It is an invitation. You gave everything, and now something inside you is asking, what do I give to myself? This is not selfishness. This is individuation. This is the moment you begin to meet your own soul again. The house is quiet, but inside you something is waking, and that something is you. Let's keep going. There's a feeling that many parents never speak aloud. It doesn't come with anger. It doesn't arrive with shouting or complaint. It arrives quietly, almost ashamed of itself. I gave everything, and sometimes I just wish something would come back. Not out of bitterness, not out of expectation, but out of a deep human truth, love may be unconditional, but the heart still longs to be held. Carl Jung believed that what we suppress, what we push into the shadows, eventually returns. Not to harm us, but to be seen. And for many parents over 50, what lingers in that shadow is guilt. Guilt for wanting to be remembered. Guilt for needing to be heard. Guilt for wishing, even silently, that their children would look back, not out of duty, but out of genuine care. Let's talk about that guilt. Not to judge it, but to understand what it truly is, a sign that you are ready to meet yourself again. You were taught to give, and you did. You gave through pain, through exhaustion, through moments when no one else saw what you were carrying. You gave when it cost you time, rest, ambition, health. You gave even when your own needs sat quietly in the background waiting. And now that there is space, now that they've grown, a question arises. Is it wrong to want something back? Jung would say, not at all, because you are not a machine. You are a soul. And every soul, even the most generous, wants to be known. But here's where the guilt begins. You've told yourself that love should ask for nothing, that real parents expect nothing in return, that your reward is their happiness. And part of you believes that. But another part, the part that sighs quietly when they cancel plans or forget your birthday or go weeks without calling, that part aches. And then it feels ashamed for aching. So it hides. It tells you, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be stronger. I should be happy for them. And you are. You are proud, but you're also human. Jung taught us that we all carry what he called a shadow, the rejected, unspoken parts of ourselves that we learned were unacceptable. And for many parents, the desire to receive, to be seen, appreciated, chosen, has been pushed into that shadow. But doesn't disappear. It waits. And when the house gets quiet, it starts to whisper. It says, remember me? Remember how it felt to be thanked, to be held instead of always holding, to be asked instead of always offering. That voice is not selfish. It's sacred. It's the part of you that wants wholeness. Because love that only gives and never receives becomes imbalance. And imbalance leads to exhaustion, to resentment, to inner disconnection. You may find yourself explaining things to others. Oh, I don't need much. They're just busy. I'm fine, really. And yet, part of you isn't. Not because they owe you, but because you matter. And Jung would ask you, what part of your soul have you placed in their hands? And can you gently begin to take it back? Not to punish them, but to restore you. Let's reimagine what it means to want something back. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean your love had conditions. It means you are remembering that your heart still has needs, that your spirit still longs for closeness, that your identity, so long wrapped in parenting, is now asking to expand. This is individuation. This is the path Jung spoke of, where the parent meets the self, where the giving doesn't stop, but becomes mutual, where you no longer define your worth by how much you do for others, but by how gently you learn to care for yourself. This chapter of life is not about being done. It's about being different. It's about recognizing that some of the love you once gave outward is now meant to be turned inward. And that is not selfish. That is healing. So if you feel guilt for wanting something back, pause and ask yourself, is this guilt, or is this my soul asking to be held too? Because parents who gave everything are still human beings. And human beings need love, not for what they offer, but simply for who they are. Let's keep going. At first, there was love in every corner, spoken and unspoken. It was in the breakfast made before dawn, in the rides given without complaint, in the quiet sacrifices never mentioned. It was in the way you watched over them, in the way you worried more than you admitted, in the way your identity stretched and reshaped itself to hold everything they were becoming. And then something changed. The love didn't leave, but it turned into silence, not just in volume, but in presence. Where once there were questions, there are now assumptions. Where once there were stories shared, there are now quick updates. Where once you were the first to know, now, sometimes you're the last. And that silence, it doesn't just echo in the house. It echoes in you. Carl Jung taught that the soul doesn't disappear, it retreats when ignored. And perhaps the love you gave, steady, quiet, unwavering, has now receded, not out of emptiness, but out of fatigue. Because something sacred within you is tired of whispering into spaces where no one seems to be listening. This chapter is not about blame. It is about witnessing what happens when love, faithful and fierce, stops being met with reflection. It begins to turn inward. And that turning is where many parents begin to feel invisible. You didn't stop loving, But somewhere along the way, the exchange changed. What once flowed in both directions began to flow only one way. They asked. You gave. They stumbled. You carried. They disappeared. You waited. And now, even when you want to speak, you hesitate. Because you fear being a burden, or sounding old, or out of touch. So instead of sharing, you silence. Instead of expressing, you endure. And yet inside, a part of you aches. Why am I the one they forget to update? Why do I feel like a background character in their lives? It's not that you want to be the center. It's that you want to be included. To matter. To be felt, not as a duty, but as a presence. Jung said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most. And maybe that's what hurts, not just being unseen, but being unable to speak the truth of how it feels. You still show up. At birthdays. At graduations. With gifts. With hugs. With warmth. But part of you wonders, if I stop, would anyone notice? Not because they don't love you, but because they assume you'll always be there. You were the ground beneath their feet, the background music, the light left on, always there. Until now, a part of you wants to ask, but who is there for me? When love turns into silence, it often becomes grief. Not dramatic grief, but quiet, lingering, everyday grief. The kind that shows up when no one texts you back. The kind that appears when you buy groceries for one. The kind that settles in your chest during family gatherings when you realize no one really asked how you are. And that grief, if not seen, becomes armor. You smile more than you feel. You say, I'm fine, because it's easier. You hold space for everyone, and slowly stop taking space for yourself. But here's what Jung might remind you. The self, the soul, does not disappear. It waits. It waits for you to return, to reclaim your voice, to notice what you've neglected in yourself. Because when love turns to silence, it's not a sign of failure. It's a signal, a quiet nudge that says, come home, to you. You were never meant to only give. You were meant to live. And perhaps the love you offered to them is now asking to be offered to yourself. To the parts of you that stopped dancing. To the dreams you paused. To the voice you softened so theirs could grow. Jung believed that midlife is not a crisis, but a calling. A calling to wholeness. And maybe now is your time to follow that call. Not away from them, but back to you. So when the silence feels unbearable, listen. Not to their absence, but to your presence. It is still here, and is asking for more than survival. It is asking for truth. You can still love them. You always will. But you are allowed to speak again, to take up space again, to be more than the quiet background. You are not fading. You are forming. Let's keep going. There is a moment many parents dread, not because of something said, but because of what is not. The absence of a simple thank you. The absence of a glance that says, I remember what you gave. The absence of acknowledgement for years poured quietly into others. It's not about needing praise. It's about needing to feel real. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the part of ourselves we repress because it seems too selfish, too angry, too unacceptable. And for many parents, resentment lives in that shadow. Unspoken, subtle, hidden beneath layers of, I'm just tired, or it doesn't matter. But it does matter. Because resentment is the voice of love that has been ignored too long. It begins not in bitterness, but in love given without return. This chapter is about that silent resentment, the one you feel but rarely say aloud. Not to blame, but to set free. You raised them with everything you had. You put dreams aside. You delayed healing. You tolerated things no one saw. And you did it from love. But now, years later, the energy you once gave so freely feels depleted. And the gratitude you imagined, even hoped for, hasn't arrived. Instead, you hear, I never asked you to do that. Or worse, silence. You try not to let it in. You tell yourself, they're young. They're busy. They'll understand one day. But a part of you wonders, what if they don't? What if they never see what I carried for them? Jung would say this resentment isn't wrong. It's a message. A message from the part of you that has been neglected, not just by them, but by you, because you've long prioritized giving. You've long said, it's fine, when it wasn't. And now, that neglected self is rising. It doesn't want to punish. It wants to be acknowledged, to be held, to be told, you were not invisible. You mattered. Your love left a mark. But when that recognition doesn't come, a fracture forms. You still show up. You still support. But a distance grows inside. You laugh, but less. You listen, but with more silence. You give, but with an ache that wasn't there before. You don't want to feel resentment, but it's there. Not all the time. Just in certain glances, certain memories, certain moments when you remember how much you gave and how little came back. This is not a flaw. It's a wound. And like all wounds, it needs air. It needs gentleness. It needs truth. Jung taught that we must face our shadow, not to banish it, but to integrate it. And your resentment? It holds truth. It says, I am tired of pretending I don't feel hurt. I am tired of giving without being seen. I am tired of acting like I don't need care. It's not about blaming them. It's about claiming you. You were not just a provider. You were a person. You still are. And maybe now, your inner self is asking, can I stop waiting for gratitude that may never come? Can I grieve what was not said and still find peace? Can I love myself enough to no longer need to be validated? Because the truth is, you deserve the thank you. You still do. But you may never get it from them. So the healing may need to come from you. This is the moment Jung would call an initiation, the turning point where you begin to reclaim the parts of you that were set aside in service of others. It's not too late. You are not too old. Your worth is not in their words. It's in your becoming. You can hold the ache and still move forward. You can feel the resentment and not be consumed by it. You can speak gently, truthfully, and begin to mend what was broken. In you. If they never say thank you, you can still say it to yourself. Thank you for staying. Thank you for sacrificing. Thank you for not abandoning them, or you. And thank you for being brave enough to name what still hurts. Because in that naming begins the healing. Let's keep going. There is a quiet crisis that happens not with a bang, but with a whisper. It begins the moment the role ends, or rather, the moment it no longer defines you. You were mom. You were dad. You were the center of their world, the scheduler, the comforter, the one who always had the answer. And now you are something else. But no one told you what that something is. Carl Jung believed that the second half of life is about individuation, the process of becoming whole. And this chapter, perhaps more than any other, is about what it means to begin that journey when the role you lived by for so long begins to dissolve. Not as a loss, but as an opening. You spent decades pouring yourself into the lives of others. You did it with love. You did it with exhaustion. You did it with strength you didn't know you had. And now that they've grown, that part of your life is quieter, sometimes empty. And the question arises, if I'm not always giving to them, who am I giving to? More importantly, who am I, now that I'm no longer needed in the same way? Jung taught that midlife is not a time of decline, but a time of deep transformation. It is when the ego, built from duties and identities, must step aside so the true self can emerge. And this emergence, it often begins with confusion, with a strange grief, with a quiet yearning to meet yourself again. Because who were you before they needed you? Before the diapers and carpools and broken curfews? Before the sacrifices? Before the long nights? And more powerfully, who have you become since? You are not just a parent. You are not just the sum of what you gave. You are a whole being, still unfolding. And this stage of life is not an ending, is the invitation back to the self. But returning to yourself is not simple, because the roles you lived in were armor. They gave structure, purpose, identity. Without them, things feel loose, ambiguous, sometimes frightening. You may look in the mirror and wonder, who am I now? Jung would say, you are now becoming what you always were beneath the role, beneath the obligations, beneath the giving. You are becoming you. But here's the truth, the self doesn't rise until the ego lets go. And letting go of being the parent, the one who fixes, manages, sacrifices, can feel like loss. So we hold on. We keep trying to be useful. Keep offering help. Keep checking in. Because the silence scares us. But within that silence waits your soul. You are allowed to dream again. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say, now I choose me. Not because you love them less, but because you are loving yourself more. This is not abandonment. It is resurrection. You have earned the right to be more than needed. You have earned the right to be seen. By others, but first by you. So what now? Now you begin again. Not from scratch. From depth. You listen for what excites you. You try what you always postponed. You speak truths you've long silenced. You reconnect, not just with the world, but with your soul. You let yourself grieve what is gone, and welcome what wants to be born. You become curious again. Because this chapter is not about decline. It's about authenticity. The most powerful kind of love is not the one that sacrifices endlessly. It's the one that returns to the source, to the center, to the self. And the self in you? She's waking. He's listening. Not to what the world expects, but to what your heart longs to create next. Let's keep going. You spent a lifetime loving others. You loved through broken nights and silent mornings, through noise and absence, through giving and letting go. And somewhere in that journey, you lost pieces of yourself, not out of carelessness, but out of devotion. Now, in the quiet of later life, something stirs again. Not the longing to be needed, not the ache to be recognized, but the quiet return of your own presence. Carl Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. And in this final chapter, we speak of love, not the kind you give endlessly outward, but the kind you now begin to hold inward. The love of the self. You are not who you were. You are deeper now. The pain carved out space. The silence forced reflection. The absence invited depth. And now, what rises in you is not weakness, but wisdom. You no longer beg to be seen. You choose to see yourself. You no longer wait to be called. You learn to listen to your own voice. This is not detachment. It is liberation. There is a love that does not chase. A love that does not apologize for existing. A love that does not require an audience. This is the love of the integrated self. The part of you that has walked through sorrow and learned to carry it with grace. The part that has been invisible and now knows how to feel itself. The part that has given without return and now receives from within. You are not a story that ended. You are a story that transformed. Jung spoke often of symbols, of dreams, of myths, of the archetypes that live within us. And if there is one archetype rising in you now, it is the wise one. The one who has walked through the fire. The one who no longer fears being alone. The one who sees beauty in quiet things. In a breeze. In a shared glance. In your own breath. This kind of love is not loud. It doesn't declare itself. It simply is. You may still miss them. You may still wish they'd reach out more. You may still grieve the moments lost. But you no longer lose yourself waiting. You rise. You tend to your inner garden. You make peace with what was and open space for what still might be. This is not denial. It is maturity. The maturity that knows everything given lives on, not in recognition, but in the transformation it created in you. You are not a background character. You are not forgotten. You are the root that allowed others to rise. You are the soil they grew from. And now that root grows upward, into your own sky. This chapter is not about leaving them. It is about not leaving yourself behind anymore. The love you gave them, it was real. And now, it teaches you how to love yourself. Not in theory, but in ritual, in silence, in gentle truth. You light a candle not for memory, but for presence. You sit not in waiting, but in being. You are not hoping they'll return to you. You are returning to you. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And now you have that privilege. Not as a reward, but as your right. You gave everything. And now is time to become everything you are. Let this chapter be the beginning of wholeness, of quiet joy, of loving again, not from emptiness, but from overflow. The story continues. And this time, you are not invisible. You are home. Thank you for walking this path. If these words met you in a place you've rarely spoken from, like, comment, subscribe, not for us, but for yourself, so that others like you might hear. You were never too late, never too far gone, never too empty to begin again. You were always whole. You just needed the silence to remember. If this message spoke to a silent part of you, if it helped you feel seen, even just for a moment, click like, subscribe, leave a comment, not because you need to explain yourself, but because somewhere, someone else is feeling the same. And your presence here tells them, you are not alone, you are not forgotten, and your story still matters. We walk this path together, quietly, deeply, always.